one bag and drove north. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moment everything breaks. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. The kind of quiet that sits in your chest like a stone that's been there so long you stop noticing the weight. That night, driving up the coast highway with the heater running and the radio off, I finally noticed. My name is Allison. I was 38 years old. I had a master's degree in brand strategy that I hadn't used under my own name in 6 years, and I had just watched my husband stand in our kitchen. The kitchen of the house I'd helped design, in the neighborhood I'd suggested, in the life I'd helped architect from the ground up, and tell me that he needed me to sit this one out. "It's a branding event," he said. Like that explained everything. "The investors we're courting have a very specific image in mind. I need the room to feel cohesive." I remember staring at the tile backsplash. I picked those tiles, drove 40 minutes to a specialty import shop in the valley because he'd said he wanted something that felt European but grounded. I'd found exactly that. I'd found most things, actually. "Cohesive," I said. "You know what I mean, Allie." I did know what he meant. That was the problem. His name was Preston. We'd met when I was 31 and freelancing for a mid-sized consulting firm in Austin. He came in as a client. His family had a regional logistics company that needed repositioning. I'd built their whole new identity from scratch. New visual language, new messaging framework, a pitch deck that landed them 3 enterprise contracts in the first quarter after the rebrand. Preston had walked into my office, looked at the work on the wall, and said, "You did all of this?" "Every piece," I said. He smiled like he'd just found something he'd been looking for. We dated for 2 years, married in the spring. By the time we moved to Seattle, where his family wanted to expand the business into the Pacific Northwest market, I'd folded my freelance work into something quieter. He needed consistency at home, he said. He was building something big, he said. I believed him. I believed in him. Which is a different thing, though I didn't understand that distinction yet. For 4 years, I supported the growth of what became Hartwell Logistics Group, Preston's rebranded, repositioned, strategically restructured company. My company in the ways that actually mattered. I drafted the language on the investor materials. I coached him before every major pitch meeting. When they were courting a Vancouver-based firm for their first major cross-border contract, I put together a 60-page due diligence package over a holiday weekend because Preston's operations director had quit without notice. He got the contract. He bought a Porsche. My name was not on anything. I told myself that was fine, that this was partnership, that we were building something together even if only one of us had a business card. The night of the Seattle Industry Partners annual gala, which was, let me be clear, a room full of people I had personally helped him cultivate relationships with over 3 years of dinners and charity auctions and carefully worded follow-up emails. My husband told me I didn't fit the image. Not in those exact words. He used better words. Preston always used better words. He said the investors they were finalizing a deal with had a traditional corporate culture. He said his mother had offered to attend as his +1 because she understood that world. He said it wasn't about me, it was about optics. I looked at him for a long time. I thought about the 60-page due diligence package. I thought about the brand guidelines I'd written that were still, to that day, sitting in Hartwell's internal server under a folder called Preston's Files. I thought about the night 2 years ago when I'd rewritten their entire investor pitch at 2 in the morning because he'd come home at midnight in a panic. And I'd sat at the kitchen table and rebuilt the whole thing while he slept. And in the morning, he presented it without mentioning my name once. I thought about all of that. "Okay," I said. He blinked. I think he expected a fight. I'd fought before, quietly the way I did everything, but I'd pushed back. That night, I didn't have any fight left. Or maybe I finally had too much clarity for fighting to make sense. I went upstairs, took a shower, and when I came back down, he was already gone in the Porsche. I stood in the kitchen for about 10 minutes, then I packed one bag, put my laptop in its case, and drove north. I had a college roommate named Felicity who'd moved to Bellingham years ago and bought a small house 2 blocks from the water. We'd stayed close in the loose, affectionate way people do when they genuinely like each other, but life keeps pulling them sideways. I texted her from a gas station outside Everett, "Are you home? Can I come up?" She replied in 30 seconds, "Yes, I'll put the kettle on." "Are you okay?" I replied, "I don't know yet." Her house was exactly what I needed. Small, warm, slightly cluttered with the evidence of a life that was actually being lived. Houseplants in various states of success, a reading chair with a dent worn into it, 3 different blankets on the couch. She handed me tea and didn't ask any questions for a full hour. We just sat. She put something on television that neither of us actually watched. Eventually she said, "How long has it been like this?" I thought about it honestly. "A long time," I said. "I just kept thinking it would balance out." She nodded like she'd suspected as much. My phone buzzed twice that night, both from Preston's mother. I turned the screen face down. In the morning, I sat at Felicity's kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I looked at my own portfolio for the first time in years. Not Hartwell's materials, my actual work. Old client files, a few pieces I'd kept from before. I had skills that were specific and valuable and entirely mine, and I had spent 6 years filing them away in service of a man who didn't think I fit the image. Something shifted in me sitting there, not dramatically, more like a joint popping back into place. The gala was on a Friday. By Monday, I still hadn't gone home. Felicity had to go to work. She taught high school English, so I spent the days alone in her house, making calls and sending emails to people I hadn't spoken to professionally in years. Some of them were surprised to hear from me. Most were warm. 2 offered meetings within the week. Preston called on Sunday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. His message was controlled, careful. He said we needed to talk, that the gala had gone well, that he thought we should revisit the conversation we'd had Friday. No apology. Just a request to revisit. I didn't call back. On Tuesday, his mother called. I didn't answer that either. On Wednesday morning, I got a text from Jessica, Preston's executive assistant, who'd always been kind to me in the cautious way of someone navigating a complicated office, that said only, "Allison, something's happened. Are you somewhere safe?" I called her back. "The Meridian deal," she said. Her voice was careful. "The due diligence package that went out last week. There was an email chain included in the appendix that it shouldn't have been in there. One of the junior associates put together the final package and didn't realize what she was attaching." I sat very still. "What email chain?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "The one from 2 years ago. Between Preston and his father about some of the early investor arrangements. The Hargrove Capital situation." I closed my eyes. The Hargrove situation was something I'd learned about by accident 18 months ago. A set of early funding arrangements that had been structured in a way that gave Preston's father significant undisclosed influence over the company's board decisions. It wasn't illegal exactly, but it was the kind of thing that serious institutional investors would consider a material omission. The kind of thing that, if it came out during final due diligence on a major acquisition, could unravel a deal entirely. I had found an email chain about it in a shared folder where I wasn't supposed to be, and I'd quietly closed the folder and never said anything. I'd told myself it wasn't my business, that maybe I'd misunderstood, that Preston had probably handled it. He had not handled it. "The Meridian acquisition is on hold," Jessica said. "They've asked for an independent audit. The lead partner, a woman named Dr. Claudine Ferrer, she runs their investment committee. She pulled the whole executive team into a meeting this morning." I didn't say anything. "She asked specifically about you," Jessica said. "She'd seen your name mentioned in some of the early positioning documents, the brand architecture work from when the company was being repositioned. She asked Preston where you were." I looked out the window at the gray Bellingham sky. What did he say? He said you were dealing with a personal matter. I exhaled slowly. Okay. Allison. Jessica paused. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm supposed to be calling you, but I thought you should know. Thank you, I said. I mean that. After we hung up, I sat with it for a while. I felt a lot of things, none of them simple. There was no satisfaction in it, not yet, just a heaviness. And underneath the heaviness, something that took me a moment to identify. Relief. The kind that comes when a thing you've been dreading finally arrives and you realize the dread was worse than the thing itself. I learned the rest of it in pieces over the following week. Dr. Claudine Ferrer, it turned out, had a reputation in Seattle's investment community for being rigorous in ways that made people uncomfortable. She was the kind of woman who read every footnote, who asked questions that revealed she'd already done the research, who had no patience for polished surfaces that hid structural problems. When she found the email chain in the due diligence package, she didn't quietly flag it. She convened a full partner call. The Meridian acquisition, a $280 million deal that would have made Hartwell Logistics Group the dominant regional player in 3 states, was suspended pending audit. When the audit firm went in, they found the Hargrove arrangement, and they also found 3 years of financial statements in which certain internal consulting fees had been handled in ways that, while technically within the rules, suggested a pattern of papering over rather than resolving structural issues. The kind of governance problems that emerge when a company grows faster than its internal culture can manage. Preston's father called me on a Thursday. I answered because I was curious what he'd say. This has been difficult for the family, he said, and the tone he used when he wanted to communicate that something was my fault without being specific about how. I'm sure it has, I said. Preston needs you home. I'm sure he does, I said. There was a pause. I think he was waiting for me to fill the silence with reassurance or guilt. I used to fill silences like that. It's a habit that takes a long time to unlearn, and then you unlearn it all at once. I have to go, I said. Take care. I hung up and went back to my work. By then, I had 3 freelance clients and the beginning of something that felt, for the first time in years, like it actually belonged to me. The first call I'd made that Monday morning at Felicity's kitchen table was to a former colleague named Gwendolyn, who ran a boutique brand consultancy in Portland. We'd worked together briefly years ago, and I'd always liked her directness. She'd answered on the second ring and spent most of the call asking me pointed questions about my availability and what I was charging. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. I have 2 clients who've been waiting for someone with exactly your background. The problem was, I never knew you were available. I wasn't sure I was, I said. Are you now? Yes, I said. That was the beginning. Within 2 weeks, I had consulting agreements with 3 companies, a mid-sized outdoor apparel brand repositioning for a new market segment, a family-owned financial planning firm modernizing their identity, and a tech startup preparing their first institutional fundraise. Real work, under my own name, with contracts that had my signature at the bottom. I rented a small studio near the water in Bellingham. Felicity helped me move in. We assembled a bookshelf from a box, and the instructions made no sense, and we laughed for about 20 minutes over it. And when we finally got it standing upright, I put my portfolio binders on the bottom shelf and stood back and felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was called. Grounded. Preston filed for a legal separation in November through his attorney. His message to me via that attorney made clear that he attributed the collapse of the Meridian deal, at least in part, to my absence during the critical period. If I'd been in the room, apparently something would have been different. I had to sit with that one for a while, too. Here's the thing about that logic. It was almost right and also entirely wrong. If I had been in the room, if I had been treated as a partner, as someone whose judgment was worth including, as someone who fit the image, then yes, I might have caught the due diligence problem before it went out. I'd been good at that kind of thing. I'd caught similar problems before, quietly, without credit. But I hadn't been in the room. He'd made sure of that. So whatever happened in that room was entirely his. I signed the separation paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon in the law office in Bellingham with a view of the water. My attorney, a sharp woman named Brenda, who'd immediately understood the nature of my contributions to Hartwell's growth, had spent 3 months building a detailed record: the brand architecture work, the investor materials, the pitch coaching, the due diligence package I'd built over a holiday weekend that had directly resulted in Hartwell's first major cross-border contract. We didn't sue. We negotiated. It took time and it wasn't easy, but the record was clear and Preston's attorneys knew it. The settlement was fair in a way that Preston, I suspect, found deeply unfair, which told me it was correct. Dr. Claudine Ferrer reached out to me in January through a mutual professional connection. She'd been asking around, apparently, about the brand work behind Hartwell's early repositioning. She'd traced it back to me. We met for coffee at a place near Pike Place Market. She was exactly what I'd expected from everything Jessica had described: precise, attentive, the kind of person who makes you feel like the conversation you're having is the only thing in the room. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said after we'd been talking for about 20 minutes. "I'm building an advisory practice focused on governance and brand alignment for pre-IPO companies. The intersection of those two things is something most people in this space don't understand. I think you understand it." "I do," I said. "I'd like to bring you on as a senior consultant, fractional to start. We can talk about what that looks like." I looked at her across the coffee table. Outside, the market was doing its regular February thing: gray sky, cold, people moving with purpose. "I'd like that," I said. That spring, I drove back to Seattle once to pick up a few things I'd left behind. Some books, a box of materials from the home office, a photograph of my grandmother I'd always kept on my desk. The penthouse was quiet. Preston wasn't there. The housekeeper let me in and offered me coffee, and I thanked her and said no. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at the tile backsplash. Then I picked up my box, thanked the housekeeper again, and left. On the drive back north, I thought about what it costs to shrink yourself into the shape someone else decides is appropriate. Not dramatically, not all at once, which is how you'd notice. Just gradually, steadily, the way water moves through a crack in stone. You don't see the damage until the thing splits open. I'd lost 6 years learning that lesson. I didn't intend to lose anything else. The water appeared on my right as I came into Bellingham. Gray-green, wide, indifferent in the way that large things are always indifferent. Not cruel, just fast. It had no opinion about what I'd been through. It was just there, the same as always, the same as it would be long after I was gone. I pulled into the lot beside my building, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute. I had a client call at 3. After that, a proposal to finish. After that, whatever came next, which was mine to decide, fully and finally and without asking anyone's permission. I got out of the car, picked up the box, and went inside. There's a version of this story where I go back, where Preston calls on a Sunday and I pick up, and I tell myself that what happened at the gala was a misunderstanding, that he was under pressure, that I know who he really is. I used to be very good at telling myself that story. I'd refined it over 6 years until it was almost seamless. What I've learned, not from a book, not from a therapist, though eventually from both, is that the choices we make when nobody is watching us are the ones that actually define us. Not the polished pitch meetings, not the gala appearances, the quiet choices, the email chain Preston's father wrote, thinking it would stay buried. The decision Preston made, night after night, to present my work without my name on it. The decision I made for years to let him. I'm not proud of that last part. I think it matters to say that plainly. I allowed it. Not because I was weak. I've stopped believing that version, but because I genuinely thought that love meant making yourself smaller when the person you loved needed more room. I thought that was generosity. It wasn't. It was erosion. And erosion doesn't announce itself. It just keeps going until one day the structure is hollow and you're both standing in the rubble wondering how it happened. Preston wasn't a villain. I want to be careful about that. He was a man who had never been asked to examine the gap between who he presented himself to be and who he actually was. Nobody had required it of him. Not his parents, not his early success, not me. When Dr. Doff, Claudine Ferrer, required it, the whole structure shook because it had no honest foundation to hold on to. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the collapse itself, but what made it inevitable. You can build something very large on the wrong foundation. For a while it looks impressive, but there's a difference between intelligence that's been put to use understanding the world clearly and intelligence that's been put to use building a better surface. Preston was brilliant at the surface. What he never developed was the harder thing, the willingness to be honest about what's underneath, even when honesty is costly. Felicity asked me once, in the middle of that first week in her house, whether I was angry. I thought about it seriously before I answered. I'm tired, I said. The anger is in there. But mostly I'm tired of having to manage what I know so that someone else doesn't have to face it. That tiredness, I think, was the most honest thing I'd felt in years. And sitting with it, instead of smoothing it over, that was the beginning of something. What I know now is that the life I'm building in Bellingham is smaller in certain ways than what I had before. Smaller apartment, smaller accounts, quieter evenings. But there is nothing hollow in it. Every piece of it is load-bearing. Every piece of it is load-bearing. Every piece of it holds. That's what I was missing for 6 years and didn't have the right word for. Not success, not comfort, but structural honesty. A life where the inside matches the outside. I think about the younger version of me who drove into Preston's orbit and thought she'd found someone who saw her clearly. She wasn't wrong to want that. She was only wrong to stop requiring it when it stopped being true. I don't carry that as a wound anymore. I carry it as information.